Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. You're watching The Naturalist Capitalist, and I'm Reed Coverdale, and I've got Zack back on the show again. How you doing, Zack?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. I'm doing well. A few months ago we did a video about right and left libertarianism, but you were sort of a trailblazer in that field, and now it's becoming more mainstream. I'm seeing a lot of people who identify as left wingers. They're starting to check out the libertarian platform a little more, and I see that they're realizing that they had characterized it in a way that was not accurate. So, do you want to just tell us a little bit about why you were one of the first people, like what initially got you interested in it, and do you see that same trend happening?
Sure. And I do very much see it, especially with the more hardcore liberal side of like my family or my Facebook social group, the like very Obama supporting side. They're starting to really see that, okay, the Democrats maybe didn't act in ways that were supporting of my values, whether or not they said it. So they're starting to look at who has been voting or who acts in those ways. And some of them are like myself, and this is really what's spurred me on. 'Cause I'm very interested in these things, and I kind of tried to look for something earlier on. Was that libertarians and myself, we agreed on a lot of kind of foundational issues. Maybe not the like details of how to get something done, but a lot of like what our values are. And I think one of the best examples, and I've been working on my rhetoric for this a lot. There's still a lot of learning to be done. I was more of a progressive kind of maybe Green Party
Mhm.
person, but I'm starting to see now. The thing that turned me off the most was that it seems like the Libertarian Party is dominated mostly by right wing economics. So it gives you this idea that all libertarians are right wingers. But the truth is, libertarian values is not a system of economics, and it can span, all sorts of ideas. And
Right.
that maybe the political title that I fit maybe the most well into is something called a social libertarian or a left leaning libertarian. And I think my new favorite example of this is like credit unions. Like instead of a big bank, where a big bank kind of controls a market and can influence and regulate certain things, or especially our system and our big banks, like the Federal Reserve, which can really inflate the dollar or not based off of just printing more of it, which controls way, it gives them at that level way too much control. And this is essentially authoritarianism, when a few people are just making the rules that all of these other people kind of have to work with, or they suffer the consequences of not working in that system.
Right.
Whereas a libertarian value is we should be more free to choose how we want without having a overarching system of rules that might not work for everyone. So a right-leaning libertarian will say, I'm the most in control of my finances. I'm the most suited to protect it. My money's under my mattress, right? But a right-leaning libertarian on libertarian values shouldn't disagree with someone like me who would say, me and my community wanted to get together and start a credit union. They're not trying to make rules that influence markets. They're just a system that a community comes together and says we want this in it, so they support it. And there's some other cool aspects of a credit union, which is everyone who's supporting it gets ownership into it, which, and I might be a little too lazy in this area, or I haven't been a part of a credit union long enough, but I don't know what my voting rights are as a shareholder, but I get yearly reports, you
Mhm.
know. So even just from the level from a big bank versus a credit union, it's law that they have to give me reports on, what the company's direction is or what they plan to do over the next fiscal year or quarter or whatever. And just that level of transparency lets me say, oh, I do or don't want to support the direction this credit union is moving in, which is not a level of knowledge or influence you have just by opening up, let's say, a Wells Fargo or a Chase account.
Right.
So the libertarian values is let people, be in control of their finances or and
Hmm.
how that is managed. And then when you get to the right side of it or the left side of it, they're kind of detail oriented things that don't really conflict with each other. And those were the first. This is all over the place too, not just with banking, but uh, like the drug war. You know, libertarians on both sides, left and right, agree on the drug war. The right says there's no reason that the government should, regulate this or market or not, or I guess control the markets in this area by saying who can and can't do these things, or who can and can't grow weed for government research, let's say, for example. And a left-wing libertarian will also say, yeah, the drug war saying I can't use marijuana because I want to is a bad thing. That's not okay. I want to have the freedom of choice in that way. So these values of the freedom, the libertarian values, they're not always really influenced by right and left wing economics. Right. So I kind of thought that it would be an easier bridge to gap for my personal politics versus the Green Party, which again, it's not that I disagree with the values of the Green Party. I'm an environmentalist too, and I think there should be some environmental regulations, which a lot of libertarians would disagree with me on. Certain things in those areas, the Green Party and mine have the same values, but their approach to it kind of goes against why I want those things to be there. Like I want environmental protection regulations, not because I want to limit corporations and what they can do, but because I want the most freedom of opportunity for everyone, where you might not be limited because you were in an area that had poisoned water growing up. That steps over the bounds, right? I say if a company can be responsible and it's okay for putting lead in Flint's water, that's not okay. That limits other people's freedom in a way that they can't be full to themselves and really realize the fullness of their potential because a company was just disregarding their lives in that way. So some regulations I think are good, but I still base those regulations on the idea of we should be free and we should all have this level of freedom in our lives and in the world. So
yeah, that idea actually isn't that fringe even on the right side of the Libertarian Party. I mean, John Stossel is a pretty pronounced figure on the right libertarian side, and he thinks that the government's role includes environmental regulation, because what a lot of right-wing libertarians think is the government is only there when you're violating someone else's rights. You've probably heard of the non-aggression principle, and whenever you're violating that, when you're damaging someone else's property, hurting them physically, or violating their rights, the government has to step in. And I actually think probably half of the right wing of the Libertarian Party at this point would include environmental regulations in that. I mean, like all these people I've had on my show, I've asked most of them that question, and most of them have said that the government's not the only solution for cleaning up the environment, definitely, but there are certain places where you'd have to have the state say, no, you can't dump your coal sludge in the water, you can't put this into the air. I think that's becoming a pretty mainstream idea on even the right side.
Yep. And I think there are some things I would assume a lot of libertarians would agree with me, even though I haven't asked them specifically. And I'm going to be so upset if I get this wrong, but it's Citizens United that makes it so corporations are viewed as people. Is that the legislation? Whether or not that's that bill, it is. But whatever makes it so corporations are viewed as people so that they get human rights, that's ridiculous. That's almost only ever used so that a company can leverage against other people's human rights.
Right. So Brad Barron, the guy who's running against Mitch McConnell, he brought up Citizens United, saying he thought it was a ridiculous ruling. Larry Sharp, who ran for governor of New York, he also said the same thing. I've heard it's kind of conflicting arguments about that, because I think it's oversimplified what the Citizens United ruling did, because what it was it wasn't so much, I mean, there was the money half, but then there also was the endorsement half. And there were certain organizations like Planned Parenthood and other ones like that that already could endorse somebody. And this, I think Citizens United allowed all corporations to make an endorsement. So it's not quite as cut and dry as most people put forward. It sounds like it was just about maximum donations. It was more involved in that, but libertarians are kind of split on that idea, I think. And as far as the transparency when you're giving to an organization, I think all libertarians would say they're 100% for complete transparency of what funds are going where.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right?
I think when it comes to campaign finance reform and corporations giving billions of dollars to politicians, what I would say, and what I think most people would say, is you can go after like campaign finance reform, overturning Citizens United, which are things that I am fine with. I don't have any objection to those, but you're really attacking a symptom instead of the root problem. You've got to wonder, why are these politicians getting all this money from all these lobbyists and special interests? It's because they have so much control over the economy, over where money flow goes. Yep. If you eliminate that power, then the need for all this lobbying, all this endorsement, all this campaign financing, it just dries up, because there's not going to be any benefit to all these people who are so involved in the first place. You know what I'm saying? And
I actually remember what she's going to say now, or what she did say now, and it's about transparency and how if the people actually knew what our government was doing in a real way, if the propaganda and the narratives and the manipulation wasn't happening, no one would stand for it. No one would look at what our government is doing to us and to other countries and be like, yeah, I'm okay with this. But the propaganda that makes you think it's the other citizens, the Republicans' fault, the right wings, it's all their fault. Or even that at the government level, the two sides are in a battle that neither can win. That's just narrative and propaganda. And if at the real level, all Americans just knew what our government was doing, people wouldn't be okay with it. They really wouldn't. And on either side, right or left, they would. I think it's something like 70% of the entire country, or 69%, which is better, of the entire country supports Medicare for all, and then 88% of Democrats support Medicare for all. So I feel like it's mind-blowing for some Democrats to realize this, when they realize that, most of the people I'm calling deplorable idiots actually supported a lot of the things that I like. I just don't know that because I don't have any Republican friends. Some of them aren't, but some of them aren't unwilling to learn this, and they do, and they're like, I had no idea that, people were actually pretty reasonable, and they like the idea of helping the sick. It's only the Joel Osteens of the world that I know about, Right. And some people are willing to be like, oh, damn, that's all I knew, my bad. But then there's the narrative and the propaganda that makes it so some people are like, no, the government, the Democrats are on our side. They're fighting against all of that stuff, as Pelosi and Biden continue to specifically block Medicare for all legislation, or anything that's like universal care legislation in any way. Like, personally, I don't think Bernie and Jayapal's bill is even the best one. I support government healthcare for a couple different reasons, but not the way that Bernie had it laid out.
Mm-hmm.
I think Australia is a better model, but
I want to talk about a few of those ideas, because I think Tulsi Gabbard's campaign was my last hoorah for good government instead of just less government. It was the last time I was like, okay, I'll give this a shot, sure. But I'm way beyond that point now. So it's not necessarily, I don't think there's anything immoral about Medicare for all. I know some libertarians would make a case that it's immoral. With the government that we have in place, I have absolutely no faith that it would, first of all, be a clean bill that ever passes. And then if it did pass, we have bureaucrats in charge of it. I have no faith that it would stay the pure system that was put in place. And then this also goes for education. I mean, it goes for pretty much everything except for the government saying, you don't do this. Like, that's about all I trust them to do at this point. So I want a lot of these things. Like, I want better education. I want better healthcare. I think the last way to do it is a top-down solution. I think it's what you were talking about earlier with like credit unions. I think, health insurance cooperatives, things like that, where it's a citizen-based involvement where we can get more and more people to buy into something that's going to improve from the bottom up. Because I'm sure you've been reading like Justin Amash's tweets this week about
love him. He's on fire right now. I love it.
I mean, he's totally right. I mean, we should have a government that works and we should have a functioning system, but we just don't. So I think, probably a lot of libertarians agree with me on that. They're not necessarily, screaming against the idea that the government gave us healthcare. It's just we have absolutely no faith that they would do it. And, people point to other countries, they can do it. It's like, yeah, they can, but, they can also have a military that doesn't bomb the shit out of,
everybody,
80 other countries or whatever. And, we don't, they can
I will say this, though. Part of the biggest problem in our healthcare system is how inflated everything is, because we just let, big pharma and insurance companies inflate things forever. And if the government were in charge of giving everyone healthcare, they wouldn't use those inflated numbers. They would be like, oh, we need to cut these costs down right now, which is one thing I trust them to do, which is like make it cheaper than anyone's saying it will be. And that's a good thing. But I do agree more with you in terms of healthcare co-ops and a different approach than just relying on big government to do it all for you. Because even in a good plan like Tulsi's plan, you still have to outline what things the government would and wouldn't cover. That still means that there are some people in the world who would have a super rare instance of a thing, and they would have to go up into a panel and have a discussion on it in front of doctors who would decide whether or not they're going to get the care. And there's pros and cons to all of these systems. I just know that our healthcare right now is so broken that something needs to change, even if it's just to try something that we haven't before.
So you brought up inflated costs. What do you think about removing patents from a lot of these?
I love it so much.
That to me is a bottom-up solution, because then the problem is there's no competition with medicine, because someone invents something and they own it and they can charge $800 for it when it's worth $8, and there's nothing you can do. So if we could eliminate that, prices would go down.
Like patent trolling is like a huge big thing, and I don't need to get into all of the different kinds of patent trolling, but one kind that really happens in the pharma and insurance and medical industry is let's say I'm an inventor, and there was an episode of Shark Tank that I'll pull specifically from. A guy invented a new type of like nasal strip, goes over your nose, it helps you breathe, and it's better than any nasal strip that's ever come before it. It's almost a cure for any kind of congestion. And he went on Shark Tank and told them, like, the reason more people haven't bought this right now is because the only people who have made offers on this patent are different pharma companies, and they're all trying to buy it so that they can not make it. Just make sure that no one else can, because they sell treatments to congestion, not cures. And that's not, both my parents are doctors. That's not the first example of this that I've ever heard, but they're everywhere. And some conspiracy theorists will be like, oh, they're hiding the cures for the most, all of the diseases in the basement somewhere. And no, they don't have the cure for everything. They probably don't have the cure for cancer, especially something like cancer. But there are cures for things that they're just not selling. They're patents that they have, that they own, that are sitting in their basement because it threatens their profit. It doesn't make them as much money as a treatment to a thing that keeps you going back. And it's not a conspiracy to talk about this. It's just them kind of playing the market. And medical patents. And I'll actually bring this point up because I make it a lot. And it's one of the things I disagree the most with Ron Paul when he says healthcare. He doesn't like the idea of healthcare as a human right, because it asks doctors to provide care. It's like your human right requires my participation. And on some level, he's right. But in my opinion, he needs to separate the idea of healthcare that's provided by a doctor, like the actual, I'm giving you a shot, I'm drawing your blood, I'm giving you surgery, versus the medicine side of it, which is just a vial of chemicals made in a lab. There's Yeah, sure. There's some truth to, if you're a surgeon and you're asked to do things that would violate your freedoms as a surgeon, there's some give and take there to have some more arguments, I think. But where Rand Paul really, I think, needs to make that differentiation is to say medicine, there should be no barriers of access to medicine. If there's a cure in the world and we know it, it's like there's no like healthcare is not a commodity. I can't just make a like, oh, my choice is to do the thing or die. Like
Right.
it doesn't apply in the free market the same way that other things do. When you're trying to sell a product or offer a
Right.
service, it's not like that. And again, when it comes to the service of healthcare, you can make an argument and say, sure, private hospitals, are okay because some might provide a different kind of care in a better way, and people support that more. But the where the government should, I think, come in on this is say your intellectual property rights don't really exist when it comes to cures for medical diseases. That should be, and it should, like it should be open source. There was a story that very recently that was like Russia hacked the labs making COVID vaccines information so that they could have the vaccine too. Those bastards. And it's like,
Oh, terrible.
why on earth are we hiding vaccine research? Shouldn't that just be a thing that is just open source? Everyone in the world is collaborating on vaccine research, so we have the safest, most effective, healthiest working vaccine for everyone. But that's
Yeah.
that's not what the case. Pharma wants the patent so that they can sell it to the rest of the world and make the money from the cure. And
Yeah.
that's insane that happens
Yeah.
because
I
and
mean, yeah, I think it's crony capitalism at its worst. It's the government protecting a certain producer from, competition. And I would take this beyond medicine. Like, I think patents have gone way out of control. And I understand the argument behind them because if you want people to innovate, you're going to want them to have, a stake in their invention and not just to have everyone else make. I understand the concept behind it, but I think it needs to be completely rethought because
oh
you
yeah.
brought up Shark Tank. I've watched a lot of Shark Tank, and some of the patents that are out there for common sense, how you would put something together, someone can patent it. I remember watching this episode where this guy had made it was like an appliance coat you could put your tablet in and your phone in, and he patented the idea that a wire went from one pocket down to the next. Like that was
Yep.
patented. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's so dumb. And I
There's
mean,
patents that are like transmitting information over a wireless network. So all of Bluetooth, all of wireless, all of that technology was once owned by a patent troll who was like, I could see this being a thing. I'll file a patent. Fuck it. And I don't know how that lawsuit's, panned out, but whoever owned that patent, they just waited till the internet was a big thing. And he was like, oh, all of you owe me all the money from the internet. And then people were like, no, 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 that's not okay.
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean it's completely ridiculous. And the place I understand patents the most or copyright is with the arts, like with songs, if you write a song or something. And I was talking with one of my friends about this, and he made the great point. The singer from Creedence Clearwater Revival, John Fogerty, I don't know if you know much about him, but Fantasy Records was the one publishing all of his songs, and then there was a fallout inside the band. So John got angry with the other three members and they split up, and Fantasy Records was siding with the band over John. John wasn't even allowed to sing his own songs that he wrote because Fantasy Records owned them through copyright.
Yeah.
So I mean,
And
even the arts is just ridiculous. It's just, I mean, it's
and
so
we're
dumb
supposed
that,
to have certain rules like fair use copyright laws, but YouTube spits in the face of that every day, and honestly, so does the government. You're
yeah.
supposed to be able to, like, yeah. I do agree. Like the whole way we do intellectual property kind of needs to be rethought. And maybe they need to all sunset. Like there's no such thing as a patent that lasts indefinitely. You created a thing. You as an innovator innovated a thing, and then you got a benefit from it and paid out. Cool. Now move on or
Yeah.
something. I don't know exactly how it needs to be done, but yes, like the way our system now just doesn't work, and it's no more glaring anywhere than with medicine. Medicine is just screwed up when you can realize that they actually do have some cures, just doing nothing in a basement. And if you as a scientist didn't know that they had the cure for this, and then you found out the same kind of cure, and we're like, yes, I cured this disease, and you went out there and told everyone about it, then the pharma company would just sue you, take all of your money, and then shut down the project. And it's
Right.
like, oh, everyone who is getting cured from this disease now has to go buy treatment from these guys because they just don't feel like letting anyone else be cured. And that's so messed up.
Yeah.
That's not okay.
Oh yeah. And I think like I mean you brought up I think you meant to say Rand Paul, right? Not Ron
Yeah,
Paul with
yeah, of
yeah.
course.
But I've heard Ron Paul talk about exactly what you were just saying there with pharmaceutical companies and drug companies. He called them drug dealers that the government just protected all the time. And I think left wingers like never heard that side of the argument. It's just like, oh, these right wingers, they love these big corporations. I've heard Noam Chomsky talk about Ron Paul and say, yeah, he's pretty good on foreign policy, but he wants us to be slaves to all these giant corporate entities. And it's like, what are you talking about? Have you ever listened like in depth? And this is what needs to happen. Like we need to have these conversations like you and I are having right now. And the more we start drawing out subjects, people on the right and left both realize, oh wow, that guy over there doesn't have the craziest thoughts. There are some right libertarians who I think have been really shown to be hypocritical throughout this the deal that was going on in Portland with the protesters and the secret police. Like I saw most libertarians, I gotta say like 95% were full on rejecting what was going on from the police side and the secret police like kidnapping people. It was soundly rejected, but that little 5% block was like saying, yeah, fuck those commies. It's like you can't say that as a libertarian, like just because they disagree
Yeah.
with you on their economics, as long as they're not doing anything to you, you can't be okay with that. So I mean, I think there is a lot of crossover, and I really want people to start listening to opposing sides and realize how we could attack this from.
And like a lot of the leftists, and or not even leftists, but just people who have left-wing economics need to understand that like some right-wing economics aren't terrible, and then you can do these like crony capitalist things that seem like you're being a leftist. Like Joe Biden recently, he put out something called the Build Back Better plan, and part of his Build Back Better plan, which is it's specifically geared towards what he says is helping brown and black people from the effects of COVID, and
Right.
especially brown and black owned businesses. And part of what he wants to do to protect them from shuttering forever or just losing everything is to, and I quote, encourage private equity firms to start investing in these businesses. But it's insane to me that anyone can think this is an option that's acceptable or like something we should encourage. Because Biden is essentially saying that these private equity firms, first off, would buy stake in equity into these black-owned businesses, which would make them less owned by black people, which is a white savior complex that I can't even fathom. Like that's a whole other level. Like, oh, you poor minorities, you can't run your businesses in a time where we're destroying your businesses. We'll come in and save you with the tax money that we're being given by the government to, like we're bailing out these huge firms with tax money in the CARES Act and the HEROES Act.
Yeah.
and it's like, so we're paying the government to give our money to private equity firms to buy ownership of minority businesses and then try and pat ourselves on the back like we're helping them keep their businesses open. They won't own them anymore.
Right.
It's insane to me. It's like the idea of capitalism itself would say you can't do that. Like the government telling private equity firms who to invest in should not be happening. And a libertarian should be saying the government needs to get the hell out of that, like right away. You can't like you should not be helping the corporations with our tax money. If you're going to help anyone, it should be the people, because the federal government representing us, you should be helping us, not corporations. But it's a whole other level when you tell the private equity firms you just gave a bunch of tax money to which businesses to buy equity stake into. That's insane. And that's not capitalism. So you get a lot of leftists who are like, oh, capitalism is evil. And if, let's say Biden wins, and let's say he enacts this plan, and then let's say 3 years from now, we realize that how terrible it is that all these businesses are just being shuttered or controlled by private equity firms, they'll go, oh, how could we not, how could we have known, or how did we not see this coming? Except they'll still blame capitalism as a thing that's happening. Like it
Yes.
isn't just a weird form of an oligarchy doing whatever the hell it wants, essentially. That's not capitalism to do any of that. When
No,
American Airlines asked to be bailed out because they spent too much money buying back their own stocks, the government in a capitalist society would be like, why didn't you hang on to some of that money at least? And,
yeah.
and it's like they'll lay off the employees while they have the tax money and then give themselves bigger bonuses. And leftists are like, grr, capitalism. And I'm like, your socialism's not going to solve this problem, because there can be crony socialism too, which is honestly giving bailouts to corporations every time they want it.
Yeah, I mean, this is nothing new. The first time that I think it really obviously happened was in 2008. All the bank bailouts and the bailouts to the big companies. And, there were the protests on Wall Street, against capitalism. And there's this great video, I think you've seen it, but if anyone's watching, Peter Schiff, he goes to the Occupy Wall Street protest. I think it's called the I Am the 1% or something. And he's just talking to all these people about how capitalism, just like you said, it would have just let all these banks fail, all these businesses fail for being irresponsible. But instead, we bail them out. And whenever we do this, just like you said, we always blame capitalism and say we need to do, more of this. We need more of this quantitative easing. We need to print more money. We need to bail out more companies. We just didn't do enough last time. And every time it gets worse and worse and worse. And I think people are waking up to it. I mean, that's what I love about this YouTube channel, but also my Twitter page. Like I think I have mostly libertarians following me, but I bet the next largest group is leftists, and it's because I'll get into a conversation with them and they'll see my username, naturalist capitalist. They'll be like, this guy, loves Trump and he loves this economy, and then I'll, so they'll throw all these attacks at me, and then I'll start agreeing with them. I'll be like, yeah, no, this economy is totally rigged for the rich. It's rigged for the bankers. It screws over the middle class. And they're just like, whoa, like what's going on here? And it disarms them, and then you can have a real conversation about how we move forward.
Yeah, you get told in school that crony capitalism is capitalism, and then you read Marx and you're like, well, some of this makes sense. But if you would have actually read what real capitalism is, you would have been like, okay, I can see the other side too. But you never got a good picture of it. You just got told our government is good, don't disagree.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So I am seeing a lot of people, it's not happening so much on the right anymore, because I think the right libertarians have pretty much given up on the Republicans. But I've seen a little bit of Rand Paul 2024, and then on the Democrat side, I see Tulsi Gabbard 2024, Nina Turner 2024, and we haven't even gone through this election yet. There's still an election in November, and everyone's just got these dreams about, the Republicans are going to choose Rand Paul, and then at the same time the Democrats are going to have Tulsi Gabbard, and we're going to have Jesse Ventura. It's like, what nomination process did you guys just sit through, and why are you thinking
I've said it before. It was like, we have 4 years to pick a really great person. We don't have to just pick someone who we know about right now. There's a lot of people we didn't know about, Yang or Williamson, and they brought a lot to the table. So we can look in a lot of places. Yeah. It doesn't just have to be Congress.
Right. Yeah, and there's a lot of great candidates running for in libertarian positions. I've had a lot of them on my show. And I just want people to start thinking outside of the duopoly box, because it is so obvious they do not give a fuck. It's a lot of people, I think a lot of progressive leftists are hoping that Trump is going to win, because that proves that the Democrats need them. And I'm first of all, I think Biden's probably going to win. But even if he doesn't, the Democrats don't need you any more than the Republicans need me. They don't need either of us. They don't care about us. And as long as there's this low voter turnout, and they can just get that base that doesn't think outside the box and doesn't care to listen to anything else, as long as they can get them out to vote for them, that's all they care about. So what we really need to do is build a strong coalition outside of this bullshit two-way system that's really just a monopoly because they don't really
I feel
disagree
like
on
a lot of people, especially younger people online, have an idea that if we get the president that we want in power, they can start making the changes that we want. And a big reason that I supported Tulsi Gabbard was because almost all of her best ideas come from foreign policy, which is where a president has the most unilateral power. But almost all of the economic stuff, Medicare for all, UBI, almost all of it is done in Congress. So without a Congress that will support and pass these legislations, nothing happens. Like you can even have a strong coalition in the House, but if you're the Speaker of the House or the leader of the Senate just doesn't feel like putting up a bill to the floor to vote, it doesn't get voted on. So
Right.
there's a lot that needs to change about that, but people really need to start thinking about Congress more. And especially before the midterms, I got 2 years, so it's a little bit of time, but we need to find some people who are good libertarian candidates for Colorado, especially like my representative right now is a guy named Joe Neguse. I don't know how to pronounce his last name,
Yeah.
but he's as much of a crony capitalist and a neoliberal as any of them. And he's really good at fooling people. He's kind of got this Obama attitude about him. He's smooth. He really, he knows about what the issues are, and he kind of knows how to always write legislation that doesn't actually help anyone but sounds really good. And man, it's just so disgusting how he acts. Like he wrote this legislation. I think it's called the Core Act, and it's not that act itself is so bad. It's about protecting federal lands in Colorado, but he introduced it to the House, and it passed, and they all voted on it. Cool, stuff happened, and then the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, the thing that is Trump's military budget, his secret police budget, the one that was just it's sometimes passed more than once a year. Like he gets increases sometimes, but this specific one that just happened a week or two ago, it was like a 700 and something billion dollar budget for the military and secret police. So Joe Neguse put the Core Act as an amendment into the NDAA, and then he voted for the NDAA. And he will not say, yes, we did it. We voted for the NDAA, guys. We passed the Trump's military budget. He's saying, we did it, everyone. We passed the Core Act, which protects Colorado's federal lands. But it was a thing he already passed in the House. And then he put it in Trump's secret police budget so that he could pass it again and have a justification for it. And
Right.
this is the essence of what our Congress is. They will just straight up lie to your face and say, I'm an environmentalist and I'm going there to, stop foreign wars and save us money and healthcare and all this great stuff. And then they'll write legislation that sounds really, really great. And the only thing they'll ever do with it, like even if it passes the House, they'll just be like, oh, it wasn't supposed to do that. Now I've got to revote on it, but we got to do it in Trump's secret police budget so that people are confused about what I'm voting for. And it's so bad. And we need a strong coalition, especially I think libertarians are maybe the best suited to have I don't know, and maybe this is my personal bias after having supported Greens and having family that support Greens, but I really think like libertarians would be a better force to be both left and right in the House and stand against both crony Republican or Democrat nonsense. It doesn't matter which way the tides are swinging. We get 20 Congress people hanging out there, calling out both sides for the manipulation and the gaming of the whole system. I think we'll start to see something, maybe gain some traction in terms of what people are aware of. And like I said before, just knowing what they're doing in Congress and knowing how our government acts and what the truth is like most of the battle, because people won't accept it if they know. So exposing it's a big deal. And I think getting a specifically Congress, getting like a group in Congress to represent libertarian values is important. Way more important than the president, although I do still support Joe Jorgensen 2020.
Yeah, I mean, all these guys that I've been interviewing, they all support ranked choice voting. They want like same day voter registration, and then they want transparency in government. They all support Julian Assange, and they want they want honest budgeting.
There's a lot of stuff that we agree on, and so much of this country, whether or not you are angry or not at this country right now, or its leaders, or its founders, or whatever, we are a country founded on the ideals of liberty and freedom, and it's baked into so much of what we do. And whether or not you're Democrat or Republican, or however much you agree with some of the more authoritarian policies, I'm willing to bet that on a certain level, most Americans really do care about the ideas of being free and not being fucked with by a government party or a big government as a whole, or big corporations who will game the system or hurt you. You know, for the most part, really do kind of just want to be chill and be free. And whether or not that's you're right-leaning libertarian and you and your family have a farm, or you're left-leaning libertarian and you and your friends have a co-op farm, it doesn't really matter. I think like the unity for liberty, I think, is a stronger uniting force when you have the left and right economics really uniting than just the left unity between social libertarians like myself and hardcore communists who, there are policy ideals that I'll agree with a communist on, like, yes, the government should take care of all of its people, right? But they want that care to be enacted in certain ways that are authoritarian policies that I disagree with. So I think it's easier for the right wing to make an enemy out of the left, and then you got the divide and conquer politics if you tried to just go for the left uniting to beat the right. I think uniting over freedom and the idea of the non-aggression principle and just kind of not being dicks and being able to live our life in a free and healthy and, good, fun way is a better, stronger uniting force for or especially considering where we are right now as a country.
Yeah, I mean, I think the authoritarian sides almost end up on agreeing on a lot of things, even though they think they're so opposite. Because they're so authoritarian, they become protectionists, like Republicans have become just
look at the Bush admin. They're just all endorsing Biden.
Yeah.
Authoritarians agree. So
yeah, I mean, so I think you're completely right. And as you said earlier in the video, there shouldn't be any conflict between left and right libertarians, because if we're talking about voluntary exchange, if you want to have a community that is socialist in the way that they distribute food or however they want to do it, that's completely fine. Vermin Supreme made a great tweet about this when he was running, and he said, I don't care if you want free trade and capitalism, or if you want to live in your own community communistically, as long as you're not forcing your ideas on anyone else.
As long as it was consensual trade, I think is what he said.
Yeah.
I love that tweet. It's such a perfect idea of it too. Just saying, like, look, you and your friends, if you want to create a system of how you and your friends handle things, no one's going to care about that. And as long as you don't try and force that guy and his family to trade with his friends the same way you and your friends do. Like, who cares if some guy has his money under his mattress, or if you and your friends start a credit union? What sucks for everybody is when a big bank is given power to manipulate things for other people in their lives. And that's what makes it authoritarian. And that's why I think the freedom, the ideals of freedom, I think more people really do in this country agree on those grounds. And I think it's a stronger way to move forward for everyone. And that's kind of why I chose. And I took the step. I forget when I did it, a month ago, but I actually dropped out of the Democratic Party, switched over to the Libertarian Party, so that I can say that I'm in the party. I'm doing it so that I can support it, and so that the party now has more left-leaning libertarians like myself inside of it. Because I don't need the and this is such a libertarian value, but I don't need them to find people to represent me. I represent my values, and if no one else is going to be there representing me, fuck it, I'll join the party and then get on shows like this and try and speak representing my values so that exists in the world. A left-leaning caucus or whatever you want to call it. But the idea of libertarians as all right-wing economics, that's a myth that needs to be busted.
Absolutely. Well, we'll start wrapping it up here, but I want to thank you for coming on again, and I'll just give you the last word on if you want anyone to follow you on social media. I don't know if you're working on this in other circles or if it's just kind of personal or.
I mean, hey, anyone, I try to, it's hard right now, especially because of the election. And that's, I think, what the thing that's hesitant for me, making me slow down on it a little bit. But I want to find real, it's in my world to affect Colorado politics. So I would love to find a couple of people who are libertarian-minded Colorado people who would be willing to challenge some of our worst senators or congressmen, and then like form a real thing, and then maybe work with the actual Libertarian Party to say, hey, freedom values, but we can get 5,000 signatures to put this person on the ballot, and try and actually start a thing. I would like to do that. You can follow me on Twitter if you'd like to. It's at Zack of all things, ZACK of all things. Yeah, hit me up, and I would love to work with anyone who's open to it, or I'd love to talk to anyone who's just a liberal or a leftist or a communist who thinks that they have, values that they want to take care of all of our people, but might have questions about what crony capitalism is. I'm trying to work on my knowledge of that, and I'd love to talk to people about it.
All right, guys. Well, you heard him. Go follow him on Twitter at Zack of all things. And thanks for coming on, Zack, and we'll catch you guys on the show.
Thanks for having me.